Good morning. Today we look at Luke chapter 20, verses 27 through 47. And this begins with some Sadducees, and then those who say there is no resurrection ask Jesus a question about resurrection. And you know the test, I'm sure, that this woman marries a brother, a man. And he dies, and she in turn marries all of his brothers. So 7 brothers have married this woman and no children. Which, but then in the resurrection, whose wife will she be? And, Jesus doesn't give them an exact answer other than he says, in the resurrection, it's a totally different thing, and, he says those who belong to this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage. I mean, it's one of those kind of a conundrum type things we have because, we trust that we will see our loved ones again when we get to heaven. But, we neither marry nor, but that doesn't mean we won't recognize who's there. You know what I mean? But he says, because they are like angels and are children of God, being children of the resurrection. And notice he says they are like angels, not they are angels. Angels are different than resurrected human beings. Just like there are angels and archangels and all of the seraphim and all these other things in heaven too. They're different creatures. So a human being will be a resurrected human being, which still is the promise of resurrection, new life, and he says those who are considered worthy of a place, and we become worthy by believing in Jesus. It's that Jesus says those who believe in me, will come, and that's a good thing. And he says the fact that the dead are raised, Moses himself showed in the story about the bush, when he spoke of the Lord God as the God of Abraham, the God of Jacob, and the God of Isaac. So God is the God of the living, and when we are resurrected and we are in heaven, we are living a little bit different than we are here today, but we will live in that place of eternity. And and that's what Jesus says. He is God, not of the dead, but of the living. For to him, all of them are alive. So it's just, it's that belief and that trust in that resurrection. And it's, and the question from these Sadducees is strange, but it just goes to show that they were all trying to figure out together a way to get rid of this Jesus because he was causing so much concern among the leaders because so many of the people were starting to listen to him, starting to follow him, starting to look at him as the Messiah. And boy, they just couldn't really have that, and so it's just like the Pharisees and the Herodians at one spot, in the Bible where they come together and work together, where normally, they wouldn't. And the Herodians were Jewish people who supported the Roman government. And of course, the Pharisees really didn't support the Roman government. But, they didn't have a whole lot of choice. But, people came together against Jesus. Wouldn't it have been so much nicer had they come together in favor of Jesus? But we'll never know what would have happened that way. And, verse 40 says, they no longer dared ask him questions. They said, you have spoken well. And they no longer dared to ask him questions. But they still were out plotting and trying to figure out ways to get rid of him. And so then Jesus, in expanding this answer, asks the question, how can they say that Messiah is David's son if in the Psalms David calls the Messiah Lord? So how could the Messiah be David's Lord if he is David's offspring? And it's just showing us and reminding us of the powers of God, that God was able to come himself as this little baby, born as a descendant of David, 14 generations later. And, but yet David calls him Lord, this Messiah. And, so verse 44, Jesus says, David thus calls him Lord, so how can he be his son? Well, it's one of those things that only by the grace and the power of God. And then it's, in the hearing of all of the people, he says, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes and be greeted with respect and have the best plates in the synagogue. They're not always to be trusted. They are, he says, they devour widows' houses for the sake of appearance, say long prayers, and they will receive the greater condemnation. Don't be two-faced. Be honest and upright in your dealings with others. Be honest and upright in your belief and your trust in God. And it's just, this is one of the texts that just, really makes me look at these religious leaders as not such good people, and the majority of them were actually in opposition to Jesus, even though there were some that came, and believed in him. But the majority of the religious leaders of the day fell into this category that they weren't what they should be, and a good leader is one who isn't afraid to do anything that the leader asks others to do, and you think about that. Did Jesus ever ask his disciples to do something that he himself wouldn't do? He gave them power to go out and cast out demons and heal the sick, but yet he washed their feet. He said, you must be a servant of all, and it's just, to have that respect and to have that grace, to know that, I'm not any better than you. You're not any better than me. And when we interact with somebody, it doesn't matter if it's somebody we know or somebody we don't know. We interact with grace. We interact with welcoming. And, we just don't have that bitterness within us. And it's sometimes hard to just, be gracious at all times. We have people that may mistreat us or kind of ignore us or whatever it might be, or do something, that's not quite right to us, or in our, where we can see it happening, and we want to, get our revenge and everything. But, it's one of the real hard things that when we see Jesus on the cross and he says, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. It's just a reminder to us that grace, goes so much further than anything else. And I've read a few different heartwarming stories on the internet lately, and they're, when you think about the people in the public eye, some of our sports figures and others as well, sometimes we look at them and we think that they are so high above us and so much different, and then all of a sudden you find something out about that person that they're just like we are, and they have a caring attitude. Not all of them are that way. Some of them get pretty stuck on themselves and everything as well. But this is what Jesus is saying about these religious leaders. They're stuck on themselves. Don't get that way, because that's just not the way that we should live, not the way that we should be. And to they will receive the greater condemnation. That's condemnation isn't salvation. There's a difference, and I would much rather have Jesus say, welcome, and I forgive you, rather than to hear those words, you are condemned to the fiery pit forever. And this is always one of the things, it's not on the forefront of our minds all the time, our eternal salvation, but there are times that we think about it. And sometimes we really need to sit back, I think, and examine who we are and how we treat those around us in our everyday actions. And we look at Jesus and his everyday reactions. I mean, he told a parable, where he didn't scold the Sadducees. He just said, he explained it, and it is so much better to do it that way. And I admit I'm not always the best at that. But it's one of the things that Jesus models for us, to be a servant of all, to be welcoming, to be open, and to be caring. And I guess, that's the way we should live our lives.